and it seems like when we get together, it's just an unlimited amount of talk on how to grow these things, and oh, you can't do that, and all of this. And the thing that makes it different in most of the conversations that we have is that they discuss names in individual plants as opposed to generalities, because they're so good at it, the generalities, they went by that years ago. Well, there's never been a record kept anywhere that I know of that specifies particular plants, particular problems when it comes to light, air, water, the whole bit. And out of these four, there's probably as much knowledge as you're going to find anywhere. Fortunately, they're diversified in where they live, in that we have South Bay, we have the coast, we have inland with Michelle, and North County, Jerry. So that worked out pretty well too, because these four microclimates that we have in the county here pretty well cover the whole area. Now, of course, inside of these are microclimates inside the microclimates, which you even have in your backyard. But this covers the general areas. So the idea of this was to get these four people up here. I'm going to get them started just a little bit on their own area, and we're going to open it up to questions to you people. And what I would like to have from you, the questions from you, is particular problems on particular plants as to light, air. If you've got a plant that's really had a problem, you've moved it or didn't move it or whatever. So the more names you could mention, the better we like it, as opposed to generalities. So if those four would come up here, we'll get started and see what we can get this thing going. How cold you get in the winter, how hot you get, and some of the just basic problems that you have in North County.
Well, North County's beautiful. We don't have any problems out there. Don't you know that? Well, basically, in the wintertime, we, in the 5.5 years I've been down there, we've been down to 27 degrees in our shade house. And to prevent freezing of the plants, I have dug pits and started barbecue briquettes throughout the shade house, and that seemed to prevent any freeze. In the summertime, we have up to 100 degrees, and we have pretty high humidity in there, being coastal. Basically about 85 degrees, I think, is about our high temperature for our average temperature for the summertime. And we get a nice cool ocean breeze coming in about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So we have really ideal growing conditions. We have very warm days, cool nights, and it seems to be what our plants like in the area.
Okay, Michelle, I know yours is a little different because I think you get a little hotter and a little colder.
We deal with extremes. We get up to 115 in a graft house in the summertime, and very rarely get below 90. So in the winter we get down to 18 degrees. We've even gotten as low as 13. So we deal with real extremes all the time. And when we have humidity, that's our biggest problem, because the average summer doesn't have humidity. So we have everything set up for certain temperatures and climate, and then when we have something like humidity, it throws a wrench in everything and we have to regroup. So in the East County, that's what we're used to as extremes.
Okay, George, I know you don't have any problems. You're on the coast. Everything works right out there.
Our problem is that we have a very little difference in temperature throughout, well, a little warmer in the summer, but not as, within 10 degrees, I would say, with Michelle. So we have a wind from the ocean every day that really gives us a nice temperate climate. That's all I can say.
Okay, Nate, what do you got down in South Bay? Nice plant. That's what he's got, I've seen.
Well, the Honeydew Ranch is located in Sunnyside. There's lots of hot weather, some freezing, usually down to 27, sometime around in February. The high in the summer is up 100. There's usually a good breeze coming out from Chula Vista, but By the time it gets to us, it's kind of dried out. The area we're in was, when we moved out there, they told us it was a banana belt. And I kind of believe it. We had a banana growing for quite a while. I can't say that there's anything out in that area that's wrong with the weather.
Okay, what we're going to do now is I'd like for you, if you can think of any names, and I'll get it started off here. I talked to George a little bit a while ago. It's quite a problem with your miniatures, and most people have problems with them, including Empress, in that they will bloom themselves to death. This seems to be a pretty common problem. And George's got a little story he'd like to tell you about Empress.
I saw the best Empresses grown by Dave Schnabel. He's an orchid grower, and every time we went over there, he had huge Empresses. And what he did, he raised epiphyllums, and he raised epidendrums and different orchids, cymbidiums. And every time he would feed his cymbidiums, he would feed also his Empress. This way, he didn't know much about epiphyllums, but he would feed them the whole year round. And I never saw such nicer Empresses. And this is what the Empress needs. It needs food the year round. And at my house, I always give him rest in the fall. He doesn't do that. He just kept it growing the year round. This is what, when they bloom themselves to death, there's enough food there to keep the plant growing. And Randy Light moved over to Point Loma, and he was growing them the same way. And in Point Loma, he didn't have quite the luck that he had further inland. He would feed them regularly all year round also. I never could grow them more than 2 or 3 years, and then they would die back and finally die. And I found out that Dave Schnabel used malathion 4 times a year. Every time he used malathion on his cymbidiums, he also did his Empresses. So I had Solace Glow that I grew up quite frequently, and it died back on me because of that, because they just bloomed themselves to death. So all I can say is that certain flowers that do bloom very heavy should be fed regularly all the time.
When you say year-round, are you saying once a month, once every 2 months?
He would feed every 2 weeks. He would cut down. Cymbidiums required 30-10-10, but he would cut it down a little bit and feed more often.
To back up what George said, about 4 years ago, Mr. Cope gave me a small miniature and asked me to name it, and I named it after my granddaughter, Melissa Marie. And it bloomed extremely well for 2 years. And it was in a big 2-gallon pot. And then I got it down to where I had 1 sprig left. I was going to lose it, and it was the only plant left, and it really had me concerned. I sat it out in back under clear plastic, and I started in June of last year. I used nothing but rainwater on it. I collect about 500 gallons of rainwater a year. And I used Equinox on it. Every time I watered it, like weekly or bi-weekly, depending on the weather, I put in a teaspoonful of Equinox. That plant now is fully this big around. It is 3 feet long and probably has at least 500 buds on it. It's one of the prettiest epiphyllums I have ever had in my life. And I fed it year round, and it's all Equinox, all liquid, and with rainwater. So it does work. It doesn't work with everything, but it seems like the miniatures just like to be fed. But I know Michelle has trouble with Empresses. A lot of people do with spotting. Have you ever grown one out there that didn't spot, Michelle?
No, eventually it does.
It seems like it's, I don't know if it's the weather or the heat or what it is. Yes,
Did you
Gene?
mean Liquinox?
That Liquinox, yeah, the
Liquinox.
gallon, that liquid, what is it? 10?
Liquinox Grow.
10, yeah, okay. I don't know that that matters. It does, it's supposed to have, what's the stuff at the... No. Yucca. It's supposed to have yucca, and a lot of people swear by that. It may be good. It works for me, and I don't know whether it's because of the yucca or what, but I know that the little ones do really enjoy that.
It's also been developed for alkaline waters here in Southern California. So.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting to know. If you heard that, it's been developed for the high amount of alkali that we have in our soil here, and it counteracts, or in our water. It counteracts that. I didn't know that. That's interesting. That may be part of it too. Michelle, have you got anything out there that is doing good or not so good?
In the East County, one of the best things you can do is mist your plants with the Liquinox Grow.
Would you? Yeah, get up.
In the East County, one of the best things you can do is to mist your plants. In fact, I did it daily before I had a business. I don't have time to do it daily now, but when I did, the plants were plump and green all year round, and I didn't have the problems with even the small plants. Using a siphon.
You sprayed with fertilizer right in the water.
What I did was put a siphon, a bucket, 5-gallon bucket, and I would fill it with the Liquinox and siphon it and mist it from that with a hose onto all the plants in the summertime.
About what ratio was that? Liquinox to what?
What was it, 1 cup? I think it's 1 cup to 5 gallons.
3 gallons.
Yeah.
Well, I'm firmly convinced, just from what I've learned through the years, that I really believe these things take as much in osmosis in their leaves as they do in their roots. After all, they grew in the crotches of trees and they didn't have a lot of roots. And I agree with Michelle. I believe you could grow them without even being in soil. If you misted them properly and fertilized them, I think they would take it in with their root system, or in their leaf system through osmosis. Okay, George, anything else you can think of? Anybody got a question? Any plant you're having problems with? Yes.
Would the same procedure apply as much to grafted menders as to...
Michelle, you'll have to answer that, or you or Jerry, either one.
You don't want to mist your grass.
Why?
Is there a reason for that, Michelle?
Rot. They get too much moisture from the apprentice.
Your punta rots
Plenty
out,
of it rot out very fast.
so you have to be careful with your grafts. Anyone else have a question? Yes.
I'm fairly new at this, and several times I've heard 50 cross. What is a 50 cross?
Okay, Jerry, get up there and tell them about it.
50 cross.
The 50 cross is a hybrid. It's a cross that was done by Rusty Koch in the Los Angeles area, and it's a cross between Ruby Snowflake and Tassel. And out of those crosses, there's, I don't know, probably 300. Do you think 300 of them that have been named? Some of them which you might be familiar with are Ruby Pinwheel, Royal Air, American Sweetheart, which is probably the most famous. Slightly Sassy, of course. Thank you. I can't think. Okay.
American Heritage.
American Heritage. A lot of those that came out of the 50 cross had an awful lot of leaves in the blooms. They were very full of, like American Sweetheart. Great plant.
And many of them were terrible.
Oh, they were. Well, I didn't see those, so we'll forget about that. Okay, and Don, you had a question?
Yeah, Professor Huber, what causes the spotting? It's the only plant that I've got in a 5-gallon pot, and it's been doing real good until this year. It's still good, and all of a sudden it's just got spots all over it. I haven't moved it anywhere. It's got a lot of blooms, but it's got a lot of spots.
This is a scale?
No, it's
Brown?
it's like on an Empress, but it's on a
Ebert?
Professor Ebert.
It's on your Ebert?
Mm-hmm.
How long have you had it?
Oh,
Years?
years.
Years, okay. It's probably just stress on just age of the plant. I've had it do the same thing, but they're always mature plants.
Dick, you have something to add to that?
Yeah, Empress and many of those small ones that are subject to spotting, they're very sensitive to sunlight. Too much sun will make them spot. They don't like the heat. If you get out there at the right time of day, you can see the stomas, the pores actually bubbling water, while dirt can get in there too to help cause the spotting. But so
And
many of these plants that spot, it's
Yeah.
the leaves are dirty, or they're getting too much sun, they're getting the sun before the plant is warmed up and will cause it. But most of your fine leaf epis hate heat.
They don't like the heat.
They like it
And too
cool.
much light.
You check the background, most of them are growing 5,000 to 6,000 feet. The original
Yeah.
species were.
Right. Okay, yes.
I would comment too that for a lot of the epis that have got heavy triangular growth, this very wet weather we've had has been bad for them. They don't like that much.
They don't
water
like that much.
compared to the flat leaf.
Just,
The Professor Ebert probably has a lot of Heliocereus, and that's where it gets all the spines, and it's triangular. And if you've ever grown Heliocereus speciosus, you'll find out that it does exactly the same thing. In the wintertime, it gets all these ugly black spots in it, big rot spots. It's just a very difficult plant to carry through the winter unless you're growing it in a controlled environment. And Professor Ebert has a lot of those qualities.
Well, surprisingly enough, it does beautifully in San Francisco in the fall, which is weird.
Yeah. Well, you have to Heliocereus speciosus hates the heat. Just
Yeah,
absolutely hates
that's
the
the
heat.
thing.
And it's
so much
probably that
cooler.
cool temperature up there.
Yeah.
We don't do well with it even unless it's grafted even on the coastal region of North County.
okay. Nate, you got a whole lot of notes there. You got
Got a
some-
question back there.
Oh, okay, Ed, what do you got?
George, at your house, you grow the most beautiful Heliocereus elegantissimus, and I fry those little devils. And can you give us a little primer on those? Because it's really a great flower, but I have no luck whatsoever with it.
I got it many years ago, and I put it where there was a lot of shade, and it grew just fine. It bloomed. It was just gorgeous. It grew 6 to 7 feet down, you know, that just hung. And then I decided I wanted more flowers on it, so I moved it where there was more sun, and it almost died down on me. So I moved it under the great big tree now up there, and it's just growing real well again. So it seems to need a cool breeze and a lot of shade.
Do you keep it wet or dry? On which side?
About halfway. I just water once a week on all my plants. I don't have no special other way of doing it. Sometimes 10 days. Of course, this winter we didn't water at all. But
You can overwater it really easy where we are.
That's what we did.
But I'd like to say one thing, though. I worked with Ken Schaefer from Los Angeles a lot, you know, on how he grows his plants and not the way I grow mine. And there was a big difference between the two of us. He would go out every morning, and he always had a little bottle of fertilizer between his hose and the spigot. So for 15 minutes every morning, he'd go through his little patio and spray this fertilizer on all his plants. And he had the most beautiful plants I've ever seen. But they were so tender that he couldn't even pick them up. If you tried to carry them out someplace, they'd just break on him. I had several plants that he brought back to me. And when I got them, they just turned yellow because I wasn't feeding the way he was. It took me about 2 years to bring my Ariba back to the way it was when I had it. And he grew it 3 times faster than I did. So.
George,
So-
you might also tell him what happens after his plant blooms already. They just deteriorated very badly.
Yes. The thing is that he was leaf feeding them more than he was watering them. And that's how he got this real fast growth. But if you're making cuttings, I suppose this is fine, you know, for commercial use because you've got a fast-growing plant. But I like to grow mine more on the hardy side because I'm growing them for flowers more. And to grow them more for flowers, you try to harden the plant itself rather than all this heavy feeding.
Okay, any other questions? Nate, can you got anything down there on the triangular and the heavy ones? This is a big problem for a lot of people because I know they're easy over the water them. And you got anything you can give us on that? Or? Just because I misspelled your name, you don't have to be that one.
No, I don't really have anything in that specific area, but I do have a note here that says that sometimes your triangular ones might have to be shifted into a nursery area where their life that they're going to live is going to be different than these over here. Because, well, we have this soaker, a misting system at our house. Works great, just so you don't use it to water. It's just strictly for misting. Well, these areas, we've got certain of these cantankerous triangular ones. They'll turn red, they'll do everything else trying to tell you there's something wrong. I might say when I say red reminds me, George, you know it too. Up at the Wild Animal Park when Mr. Jones was with us, we had a thing. He had Miss Escondido, his pride and joy. No matter where we put it, it turned red. And no matter how we watered it, it stayed red. And how much we didn't water it, it didn't change color, it stayed red. So we put it into the upper house and we covered it with 2 or 3 shades of...
There you go.
She's giving us some.
Well, I got my hearing aids in. I can hear pretty good. Anyway, he put it up there and we covered it with 2 or 3 different thicknesses of shade cloth and it turned a different color red. Did we ever get it so it looked like it was green?
I think the plant actually has the red.
I don't know. Well, then now I'm disappointed. He says it's supposed to have red. we have one at home where we kept it back underneath, tucked in where the shade's at, and it's the prettiest green you ever saw. I might have to boot that one over the side yet, you know. It's budding. Oh yeah, pretty. What did you ask me to talk about?
I have a Moloch at home right now that's the same way. It's red all the way through and got buds all over it.
You were asking about, no, somebody over here was asking about spots. This old guy that started all this, Scott Hazelton, he says the spots, the golden spots that look like bites or stings, or you've disturbed their roots or you've got them too wet. And I think that's what some of us already decided. There's a virus in there that's caused by our dumping copious amounts of water onto them, and they're not liking it. That was for the golden spots. The black spots where you can look like it's punch outs. And again, root loss. But that can't be the case for a lot of them because they're healthy looking, they're blooming, and they're growing, but they're spotted, so that the root loss can't be blamed for everything like Scott caught. About half the things in his 2 pages of things that could go wrong and usually did, then he's had it blamed to root loss. Well, of course, he was just the one that got us all started thinking things, so maybe he was just throwing it in the wind to see what we could thrash out of it.
Something that I'd like to mention that Michelle and I have talked about several times. We very frequently will have trouble with some of George's plants when we pick them up from his place and take them inland. And I'm sure it's because they were brought up there with the coastal breezes and things. And if we give them enough time, it seems like eventually they'll acclimate, but it does take sometimes as much as 2 years. I know George has given me quite a few plants, and sometimes I really struggle with them. And I'm sure it's a tremendous difference in the weather and the way we handle them, because he probably does it different than I do. But we noticed that inland. It's a whole new ballgame inland than it is out. So what I wanted to mention to you is, so regardless of where you live, and if you're having problems, a lot of those problems can be solved right within the microclimate of your backyard. Because by moving them to more shade or to more sun or where they get air, I'm a firm believer in air. I think you can solve most of your problems if they get the right amount of air. But that's just my own personal opinion. But so if you ever have any problems, you can call these people if you live close to it and ask them. Maybe it's getting too much light or not enough light or too much water. Or experiment. You kill a lot of them that way, but we got a lot of plants. We can replenish them. That's no problem. But what we're trying to do with this group is to prevent you killing any more than you have to. Because I'm sure between the 5 of us, we probably made every mistake there is to be made. And we've learned some by that. So that's what we're trying to do, is get some of those mistakes out to you so you can prevent from doing it. Jean, did you have a question?
Wait a minute. I just want to get away from the microphone. Yeah, you're not mentioning that soil makes a difference too. Like Georgia's soil is much looser or more compact than ours.
Right.
Because we have to water more often, and
Right.
therefore we need looser soil.
All right, let me do this. Nate, give me an idea what kind of soil you're using. Let's go that way. That's good. That's a good idea, Gene. That makes a difference.
Our mix is 1 2 cubic foot bag of Unigrow potting soil, 1.5 cubic foot bag of azalea mix, 1.5 gallons of small bark, 1.5 gallons of perlite medium to large, not the fine stuff, 2 number 3 cans of agricultural charcoal, 1 cup of bone meal, 1/2 cup each of sulfur and sulfur potash.
That makes about how much, Nate? 30-gallon can full, roughly?
Just about that much short of a 32-gallon can, garbage can. And it works, let me pat myself on my wife, I'll pat her on the back.
Yeah, we do that. That's all right, go ahead.
A few weeks ago, we had some of these last Mother's Day cuttings on the auction table over here. And from June, when we put them in the ground, until we sold them here, all of them had long,
Yeah, yeah.
beautiful. This is good stuff.
Yeah, it'll work. George, if you give us, you don't need the amounts, but give us what you put in it.
It's similar to what Nate said, only I use 2 cubic feet of each. I buy a sack of all the ingredients that he said, except of course the bone meal and
But don't you use
some-
redwood?
Yes, I used the 1/8 to 1/4 inch, the smallest redwood bark, the fir bark, the orchid fir bark. You get it at Anderson's has it, or another place.
I think yours would be. Michelle, is there a particular mix?
Like everything else, ours is completely different. We use the planter mix, sponge rock, the small or the large orchid fir bark, depending on a small pot or a large pot.
Not the large, the medium.
I should read them all off. Medium bark, the small, large pots. But one thing we have discovered is that by using the charcoal, it makes a difference. Things seem to grow better. The soil stays sweeter, and we have less problem with root mealing by using the charcoal. So we've had to go back to using charcoal. Another thing we can't do in the East County is use the oak leaf mold. For some reason, we have a problem with root mealing when we use it there. Things stay too wet that we get root rot, that type of thing. So where other areas have no problem with it, we have to make adjustments like that for the East County. Something else I was going to say.
What she meant on that bark is, they I have quite a few small pots, and they use, what is that, a quarter, George, the little stuff?
1/8 to
1/8, and then when they put it into the larger pots, they have a different mix and use the quarter.
Yeah, it's the medium bark that we put with the larger plants. The other thing I wanted to mention was the Osmocote. We put that in with the large mix for the large plants. And also, even with the small pots, we have rose systemic that we mix in with the mix. And that does a lot for the root mealy also.
Hey, Jerry?
In our mix, we use, we mix it up in about 55 cubic feet at a time, so we use about 1 part of each as we do it. We use oak leaf mold, we use forest humus, which is a ground fir bark. It's very fine. And we use pumice, which is a natural product. It's sponge rock prior to being exploded or heated and exploded. So it's like a rock, and it'll hold about 3 times its weight in water. And we use small redwood bark in it, and let's see, bone meal, and I use Osmocote 14-14-14 in the mix. And then for the 14-14-14 goes in all of them, the large plants, the small plants, and the cuttings.
I think as you can see here that we're talking about different conditions and everyone has their own idea. And I think we all will agree that if it works, use it, you know. Yeah, sure.
Where can we get the charcoal? Because I've looked, it's not easy to find. And how much do you recommend using charcoal in a mix?
If you measure by, say, a wheelbarrow full, less than a gallon pot for the whole wheelbarrow of charcoal. It doesn't require a lot of charcoal because you're using the bark along with it and the sponge rock or the pumice, whichever, for drainage. So it's mainly for sweetening the soil.
At one time when I was with the Master Gardeners, I took some charcoal up to the University of California and at the Ag College, and they analyzed it for about 2 weeks, and they sent it back, and they says everything that we find out, it does nothing. It does nothing. They swear that it's all right, it just doesn't do anything. But all I know is when you use it, and if you have a weed and you pull that weed out, there's going to be a piece of charcoal on that root. So even though they contend it didn't do anything, I like charcoal. I think it helps.
Now where do we find it?
They just say sweet.
Home Depot.
It sweetens the soil.
Home Depot?
Home Depot has it. It's awfully expensive. We used to go up and get it in L.A. by the truckload. And when Gene was here, we had a place to store it. But I think now the minimum that they'll deliver is like, if I remember the last time I checked, was either 13 or 17 bags. But it ran almost $30 a bag. We used to get it for 12. Of course, that's a large bag. And for the average grower, you probably wouldn't need more than a quarter of a bag to last you. So if we might check into that, if there's enough people interested, we might make it. George, have you got a supply for it?
You got supplies, you got your coffee cans, you want a 50-pound bag?
You can get it? Okay, fine. Well, George has got it right back there, so just see him. But the people that really work with it, I've never heard anyone say anything bad about charcoal, except it's hard to get.
I'll say that I would use charcoal, except that it's too expensive for the quantity that we're doing.
Yeah, the quantity that Rainbow uses, it just isn't right. And Michelle has that problem too, because they do such bulk. But those of us that use maybe 1 or 2 33-gallon cans a year, it's well worthwhile. If you can afford it, I think it's well worthwhile. Yes?
Gus, are you going to tell us your secret mix?
Oh, I'm not going to tell you that. I goof you all up. I don't have a secret mix, really. It's pretty much what they say, but I don't measure anything. I just do it by eye. I throw it in. And as long as it drains good and I know what I'm watering mine, I use basically the same things that they're talking about. But you just got to keep it loose. But like Michelle says, they have a different problem out there because they have to water more often. It dries a lot more from the top because it'll be 120, 130 out there. If George watered like she did, he'd lose everything he had because of the temperature and where he's at. And so your mix, if you want it very light, if you're like where he's at, where the water's not the big thing, but she needs a little more substance in hers because to make it last longer, she'd be out there watering all the time. So those things vary by where you're at. Well, any other questions? Yes, Sherry.
I have an Esther Clark, and I am not having any luck with it at all. And I don't know what to do with it. I've moved it from here to here and there to there. And it just sits there and looks sick and...
You know anything about, any of you know anything about Esther Clark?
I'm growing Esther Clark, and I have to say it's a really good grower for me. Where do you live?
I live not too far from Gus and Mars.
Gus and March. And are you growing enough?
Yeah, I have no problems with it.
I took one back from Sherry from the Wild Animal Park here about 2 months ago, because I was going to put it on the table, and the darn thing's exploded. It's got buds all over it, and it's
Good, and I'll
just
bring
great.
mine to your house.
No.
Have you taken it out of the pot to check the roots on it, or if there are
Yeah,
any
it
roots?
came from the Wild Animal Park. It was down in the lower house, and it was looking kind of sad then. And I took it home to see if I could maybe pull it out of it. The top part, I buried it, okay? I put it in mouth on, and then I put it in a fresh mix, and I kind of put it down in the ground like you do, Michelle. And the bottom of it looks like it's okay, but the top of it is gone. It is bye-bye.
Is it dieback or just going paper thin?
It's just dieback, it's gone. And then I took 3 cuttings off of it, and they seem to be rooting, but they're all red. I mean, they are red.
It's
Yeah.
not a plant that turns red.
I know.
Is it thin, or is it?
It seems to be, the cuttings seem to be okay, they just kind of turned red. Underneath the soil, it seems to be green, but the top looks red.
Too much light?
Are you giving it strong light or low light?
No, it's in kind of sheltered. It's in my shed.
It's a plant that likes good light.
Okay.
And if it's not growing strong growth, then it's
No,
not
the
getting
cuttings
enough
haven't
light.
popped out anything. They're in a gallon container. They're in a gallon container, in a very good loose mix. But it just kind of looks sad and sick. And
Well, one more question. We're going to break this off. Everybody's getting antsy. Dick, one more question.
This plant turning red, normally it's caused either a draft. If it's limp, something's happened to the roots. If it's red and firm, it's in a cold draft, and move it out of the draft. Most of these epis don't like the draft. They like air circulation,
Yeah.
but no breeze with it.
Right. Okay.
Nate had a place between his garage that was a wind tunnel until he put some shade cloth.
Yeah.
Almost all his plants were.
Well, I hate to break this up, but it's getting late and we're going to have to quit. One thing I want to remind you, these 4 people are available. Anytime you see them out or anywhere you've got any question, I'm sure they'd be glad to help you. Let's give them a hand. I think they did a good job.